The day my daughter stood on my porch with that particular smile I hadn't seen in 12 years, I already knew everything. I just didn't let her know that I knew. I said, "Come in." And I stepped aside, and my heart did something complicated that I still don't have a good word for. My name is June. I'm 67 years old. I live in a three-bedroom house outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And until 2 years ago, I genuinely believed the hardest thing I would ever survive was burying my husband. I was wrong. But let me start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My husband Walter passed in the spring of 2011. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 9 weeks that I would not wish on anyone, not even the people who later did what they did to me. Walter was a civil engineer, careful and steady in everything he did, and he left our finances in the same condition: organized, fully paid, and enough. We owned the house outright. He had a life insurance policy. There was a retirement account that had grown quietly for 30 years, while we both worked and saved and didn't make foolish decisions. We weren't wealthy in the way people imagine when they hear the word, but we were secure. And after a lifetime of careful living, that security was mine. I have 2 children. My son, Warren, lives in Portland with his wife and 2 boys. We talk every Sunday. He's not part of this story in any complicated way, and I'm grateful for that every single day. My daughter, Claudette, is 41 years old, and she is very much the center of this story. Claudette and I were close when she was young, genuinely close. The kind of mother-daughter relationship where we'd drive to Asheville on Saturday mornings just to walk around and find a good breakfast. She was sharp and funny and had a way of making everything feel a little more interesting than it actually was. I was proud of her. I'm still proud of who she was back then. Things changed when she was in her late 20s. She met a man named, I'll call him what he was, Trouble. His name was Derek. Not in the file, not someone Walter ever trusted, and not someone I ever warmed to, though I tried. Derek had opinions about everything and money for nothing. And somewhere along the way, Claudette started seeing her family through his eyes. The breaking point came about 8 months after Walter died. I was still raw, still sleeping on my side of the bed, out of habit, still reaching for my phone to call him when something funny happened. Claudette called one evening and told me, in a tone I never heard from her before, that she felt I had always favored Warren, that I'd given Warren more when we were growing up, that the distribution of Walter's estate, which Walter had arranged himself, deliberately and fairly with our attorney, had proven it. I tried to explain. She didn't want explanation. She wanted agreement, and when she didn't get it, she told me she needed space, that space lasted 12 years. No birthday calls, no Christmas. I sent cards every year. I want that on record, and I never once heard back. Warren tried to mediate twice and got nowhere. I eventually stopped trying to reach her. Not because I stopped caring, but because a person can only knock on a door so many times before the knocking starts to cost more than she has. I moved forward. I retired from my position as a records administrator at a regional hospital in 2018. I sold the house Walter and I had shared. It was too large, too full of echo. And I bought a smaller place on the western edge of Asheville, a 1940s craftsman that I renovated slowly and with great satisfaction. I made a garden. I joined a book club. I started taking watercolor classes on Tuesday afternoons at the Community Arts Center, which I mention only because that detail matters later. I was, to my own genuine surprise, content. Then, on a Thursday morning in late October, I heard a car in my driveway. I looked out the kitchen window and I saw Claudette. She was standing beside a silver SUV I didn't recognize, wearing a jacket I'd never seen, looking up at my house with an expression I can only describe as calculating. Just for a moment, before she composed her face into something warmer, she rang the doorbell. I want to tell you I felt pure joy. I want to say my heart lifted and I ran to the door. The truth is more complicated. I felt something surge, relief maybe, or the memory of relief. And then almost immediately I felt something else, a stillness, a quiet, careful alertness that I've since come to trust. I opened the door. She said, "Mom." Her voice cracked just slightly on the word. I said, Claudette. She said she was sorry. She said she wasted so much time. She said Derek was out of her life, had been for 2 years, and that she'd spent those 2 years in therapy working through everything, and that she couldn't keep living with the silence between us. I listened to all of it. I told her I was glad she'd done the work. I told her the door had always been open. I said, "Come in," and I meant it. I want to be clear about that. I genuinely meant it. What I did not do was turn my brain off. The first visit lasted 3 hours. Claudette sat at my kitchen table and drank 2 cups of coffee, and we talked, carefully at first, and then with something approaching ease. She asked about Warren. She asked about the house. She admired the garden through the window. She said I looked wonderful. She mentioned briefly that she was in a transitional period financially. She'd left a job in Charlotte. She and Derek had shared an apartment lease that she'd had to untangle. She was looking for work, staying with a friend in Hendersonville for now, trying to get her feet back under her. I noted all of this without commenting on it. She came back the following Tuesday, then again on Friday. Each visit was warm and easy and felt genuine. I started to believe, or wanted to believe, that this was real, that she had changed, that 12 years of distance had resolved into something worth having. Then she brought him. His name, she said, was Trent. She described him as a close friend. He was perhaps 45, with the kind of easy confidence that comes either from competence or from practice pretending. He shook my hand and said my home was beautiful. He asked thoughtful questions about the renovation. He mentioned, casually, that he worked in real estate investment. I smiled and offered him coffee. Inside, that stillness from the first day had returned, sharper. Over the next 3 weeks, the shape of their visits changed. It became less about reconnecting and more about presence, about being around, being helpful, making themselves comfortable. Claudette started staying later. Trent came with her more often than not. He began mentioning, in passing, properties he was working with, investment opportunities, the way real estate values in Western North Carolina were climbing. One evening, Claudette asked if she could stay over, just for a few nights, while she sorted out a situation with a friend in Hendersonville. I said yes. I gave her the guest room. 2 nights became 5. Trent was calling more frequently. He suggested once that he could take a look at my finances, just informally, as a friend, to see if there were smarter places for my retirement savings to be working. I told him my finances were well managed and that I was happy with my current arrangements. He smiled and let it go, but I had started, by then, to do my own looking. I should tell you about my Tuesday afternoons. At the Arts Center, I'd become friendly with a woman in my watercolor class named Helen. Helen was 72, retired, and had spent her career as a paralegal for a financial crimes attorney in Atlanta. She was the kind of person who listened carefully and said very little, and when she did speak, it was worth hearing. I told her, over coffee after class one afternoon, that my daughter had come back into my life after 12 years. I told her about Trent. Helen set down her cup. She asked me 3 questions. Did he work for a registered firm? Had he ever asked to see documents? Had I noticed Claudette and Trent in private conversation in my home? The answer to all 3 was yes. Helen told me the name of an attorney. She told me to call before the end of the week. She also told me, and this is the part I thought about most, that the fact that I was already paying attention meant I was going to be okay. I called the attorney on Wednesday morning. His name was Gerald Park, and he had been practicing elder law and asset protection in Asheville for over 20 years. I did not tell Claudette I'd made the call. Gerald was methodical. At our first meeting, he asked me to bring documentation, the deed to the house, my retirement and investment account statements, my will, and my insurance policies. I brought everything in a folder I'd put together the night before, sitting at my kitchen table after Claudette had gone to bed. He reviewed it all and explained what he was seeing. The house was in my name alone, no liens, assessed at just under $400,000. My retirement accounts totaled approximately $580,000 across 2 accounts, a 403(b) for my years at the hospital, and an IRA Walter had rolled over before he died. I also had a taxable brokerage account and approximately $40,000 in a high-yield savings account. He explained the ways assets like mine could be accessed without my knowledge. Deed fraud, forged power of attorney documents, coerced signatures on financial account changes. He was not alarmist about it. He was simply clear. He recommended we take 3 steps immediately. First, place a title lock on my property through the County Register of Deeds, a monitoring service that would alert me if anyone attempted to file anything against my home's title. Second, add a trusted contact designation to all my financial accounts, naming Warren and Gerald himself, so that my institutions would flag unusual activity. Third, update my power of attorney to include a provision requiring 2-witness verification for any significant financial decisions, and make sure that document was securely held. I did all 3 within the week. I also, on Gerald's advice, had a small security camera installed at my front door and one covering the driveway. I told Claudette it was because I'd had a package stolen. She nodded sympathetically. And then I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Not because I was afraid, exactly. I'd moved past, afraid, into something quieter and colder. The hard part was sitting across the dinner table from my daughter and not knowing with certainty how much of what I was seeing was real. I want to be honest about this. I didn't stop loving her. I never stopped loving her. There's a version of this story where Claudette showed up genuinely repentant and Trent was exactly who he said he was, and everything was fine. I would have been glad for that version. I held it open in my mind as a possibility even while I was meeting with Gerald, even while I was setting up the title lock. Because I have made peace with the fact that I am both a mother and a woman with a brain, and those things are not in conflict. The answer came on a Tuesday night in December. I had been at the art center for my class. I came home 45 minutes earlier than expected. Helen had felt unwell and we'd ended early. The house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway, but Trent's car was there, which was unusual. He didn't typically come on Tuesdays. I came in through the side door, which opens into the laundry room. I could hear voices from the kitchen. I stood in the laundry room and I listened. Trent was talking. He was describing, in detail, in a calm, almost bored tone, as though he'd done this many times before, how the process would work. He mentioned a notary he used who was flexible. He mentioned that once she had power of attorney, the account transfers could happen within a standard business cycle, maybe 3 to 5 days. He mentioned the house would take longer, 30 to 60 days to clear title, but that the price point made it worth the patience. Then Claudette spoke. She said, "She trusts me now. I really think she does." Trent said, "Good. We need her to stay trusting for another few weeks." I stood in my laundry room for what felt like a long time. Then I took out my phone and I opened the recording app. And I walked back outside, got in my car, and drove around the block. When I came back, I made sure my headlights swept the front window. I came in through the front door at normal pace, called out that I was home, and put my bag down in the hallway like nothing had happened. Claudette came out of the kitchen and said, "You're back early." I said, "Helen wasn't feeling well." "Is Trent here?" She said yes. They'd been talking about, she paused, about a dinner she wanted to make. I said that sounded lovely. I called Gerald the next morning. I also called the detective, a licensed private investigator based in Buncombe County whom Gerald had referred me to previously, just in case. His name was Al, and within 4 days he had produced a background report on Trent that I want to describe as surprising, but honestly wasn't. Trent's legal name was not Trent. His name was Michael Allen Forsyth, and he had a prior conviction in Tennessee for financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a 68-year-old widow in Knoxville whom he had met through her adult child, whom he had also been involved with. He had served 18 months. He had apparently relocated to Western North Carolina and developed a new name and a new approach. He had found Claudette. Or perhaps Claudette had found him. I still don't know which. Gerald filed a report with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. I gave them the recording from my laundry room. North Carolina is a one-party consent state, so it was fully admissible. Al's background report went with it. Within 2 weeks, Michael Allen Forsyth, known to me as Trent, was arrested at an address in Fletcher on charges including criminal conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation and fraud. The Tennessee authorities were notified as well. I understand there were additional charges. Claudette was not arrested. I want to be precise about that. What happened with Claudette is harder to put into a clean paragraph. She called me the night after Trent was taken in. She was crying. Genuinely, I believe, or as close to genuine as I could measure. She said she hadn't known about his record. She said she had gotten in over her head. She said she was sorry. I listened. Then I said, I'm going to need you to hear some things. I told her that I had known, that I had taken steps before she ever stayed a single night in my guest room, that the accounts she and Trent had been planning to access had been locked and monitored for weeks, that the house she thought could be transferred had a title lock that would have triggered an immediate alert the moment any filing was attempted. I told her that none of that was why I was angry. I was angry because she had sat across my kitchen table and looked me in the eyes, and I had let myself hope. I had let myself hope that she had come back because she missed me, and because she was sorry, and because 12 years was long enough. I told her that I didn't know yet what was true and what wasn't. I didn't know how much of the last 2 months had been performance and how much had been real feeling. I wasn't sure she knew either. I told her that I was not closing the door on her, that I was constitutionally unable to close the door on her because she is my daughter, and I am her mother, and that is a fact I cannot negotiate my way out of, no matter how many lawyers I have on speed dial. But I told her that trust is not the same thing as love, and that I had an abundance of one and none whatsoever of the other at the present moment, and that rebuilding the second one was going to take time and consistency and honesty, and that it was entirely her choice whether to begin that work. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Okay, Mom." I said, "Okay." That was 14 months ago. Claudette is in Asheville now. She found a job with a medical billing company, not glamorous work, but honest work, and she seems steadier than I've seen her in years. She started seeing a therapist, a real one this time. A woman she found herself and pays for herself and talks about with a kind of seriousness that I find genuinely encouraging. We have dinner on the first Sunday of every month. Warren joins us on videos sometimes from Portland, and the three of us talk the way we talked when the kids were young and the world was simpler. There are moments in those dinners that feel like the closest thing to grace I know how to describe. I don't pretend that everything is repaired. I don't know if it ever will be, not entirely. There is a 12-year gap that does not close because two people decide it should, and there is a particular kind of wound that comes from sitting in your own laundry room and hearing your daughter discuss the timeline for emptying your accounts. That wound heals slowly. Some days it barely heals at all. But Claudette shows up. She shows up on the first Sunday, and she calls on random Wednesdays just to ask how the garden is doing. And she came to my watercolor show at the Arts Center in February and stood in front of my painting of the Blue Ridge for a long time without saying anything. And when she turned around, her eyes were full. I am 67 years old. I have buried a husband. I have sat across the table from a stranger wearing my daughter's face and smiled, and poured coffee and protected everything I'd worked for, all at the same time. I have learned that loving someone and being careful around them are not contradictory, and that a mother's heart is not the same thing as a mother's blind spot. The house is still mine. The garden is beautiful this year. Helen is coming over Thursday to look at it, and on the first Sunday of every month, my daughter comes to dinner. That is where I am. That is all of it. That is enough. I've been sitting with this story for over a year now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling the weight of it, the edges, the places where it's still rough. The hardest thing about what happened isn't what Trent did. Trent was a stranger with a record and a plan, and strangers with records and plans exist in this world. You learn about them, you protect yourself, and you move on. What stays with me, what I still lie awake with sometimes, is the fact that my own daughter sat across my kitchen table and let it happen. That she looked at me and calculated. That she came back not because she missed me, but because someone told her there was something worth coming back for. That's the part that costs something. But here's what I've come to understand, slowly and honestly, without dressing it up. The choices Claudette made didn't appear out of nowhere. 12 years of silence don't happen to a family by accident. A person doesn't walk through that door with a stranger in a scheme unless something has been building inside them for a long time. Resentment, maybe, or the particular exhaustion of feeling like the world owes you something it hasn't paid. I'm not excusing what she did. I'm saying that cause and effect are real and that outcomes, good and bad, have roots. Trent found Claudette because Claudette had made herself findable to exactly that kind of person. That is the consequence of a decade of bitterness and bad choices catching up in a single season. And my own choices had consequences too. The preparation I did, the calls to Gerald, the title lock, the recordings, those came from a lifetime of paying attention, of not outsourcing my own security to sentiment. Walter taught me that, not in words, but in the way he lived, carefully, with his eyes open, without assuming that goodwill alone is sufficient protection. I am grateful every day that I had that in me when I needed it. It didn't come from nowhere, either. It came from years of making small, honest decisions that added up. What I want to say, what I keep coming back to, is that intelligence is not a gift you either have or you don't. It's a practice. It's the discipline of staying alert when you want to relax, of asking the next question when the first answer feels good enough, of caring deeply about someone while still refusing to stop thinking clearly about them. I loved Claudette and I watched her. Both things were true at the same time, and holding both of them without letting one cancel out the other was the hardest and most important thing I did through all of it. And courage, real courage, the quiet, everyday kind, is not about being unafraid. I was afraid in that laundry room. My hands were shaking when I opened the recording app. Courage was doing the next right thing anyway, one small step at a time, while my heart was doing something I don't have clean words for. Claudette is building something now. I don't know yet how solid it is or how long it will hold, but she shows up, and showing up consistently over time. That is how trust is rebuilt, not in speeches, not in apologies, however sincere, in the accumulation of ordinary moments where a person chooses again to be who they said they would be. I am watching, I am hoping, and I am, as I've always been, paying attention.